Hello, welcome to the first in a small series of videos looking at the economics of state ownership versus privatisation. This is one of the most topical issues of the day, the extent to which key industries, key businesses should be wholly or part owned by the state, or whether they're better off operating in the private sector. So from water to telecoms to transport and many other industries in between, including steel and other businesses, the public-private debate is as live today as it was well over 30 years ago, 40 years ago, so when Thatcher introduced her privatisation strategy. So this is an introductory video to give you a flavour and a feel for some of the examples. Let's try a multiple choice question first of all. One policy to increase competition in utility industries would be to do what? Press the pause button and have a go at this question. So one policy to increase competition would be to deregulate. Deregulation is bringing down barriers to entry in markets so that the number of entrants in the markets can go up and there's more competition. Try the question number 2. In recent years, there's been strong growth in the number of private sector businesses that are used to provide public services in the UK. The question is, what is that known as? Have a go. So here's a question. Businesses in the private sector used to provide public services. That is known as B, contracting out and competitive tendering. We'll go through the definitions of those key terms in a second or two. Have a go at question 3. Shares in Royal Mail, which were previously owned by the public sector, were sold to the public between 2013 and 2015. This is an example of what? Press the pause button and have a go at the question. Well, this is an example of privatisation. The answer is B, where there is a transfer of ownership from the state sector to the private sector. The Royal Mail is now a private company listed on the stock market, owned by shareholders. Question 4. Which of the following most accurately describes a not-for-profit organisation? Have a go at question 4. Well, the correct answer here is A, firms, businesses, organisations for which profit is not the main objective. That's not to say they don't seek to make a profit. Oftentimes the profits are reinvested for social purposes, but it's not the main objective of the organisation. And finally, here's question 5. According to figures from the Office for National Statistics, in 2019, 16.5% of all people in paid work were employed in the public sector. Which one of the following organisations is not part of the public sector? Have a go at question 5. So which of those, A, B, C or D, is not part of the public sector? The correct answer here is A, charities working on a not-for-profit basis. The public sector includes central government, so including civil service and National Health Service. It also includes local government, local councils. For example, a local council might operate a leisure centre on behalf of the local community, or a swimming pool, for example. So some key terms. First of all, what do we mean by nationalisation? Well, nationalisation is when the government takes over a private sector company so that the business is now wholly, in other words 100%, or majority state-owned and controlled. So nationalisation is a movement from the private to the public sector. Privatisation is the reverse, the opposite of nationalisation. It's when there's the sale of a state-owned business, a state-owned enterprise, to the private sector. Now that can be through a stock market listing. So, for example, the Royal Mail moved from public to private and was listed on the stock market. People could bid to buy shares. Or it could be where the public sector business is sold to an existing private sector business. I'll give you a couple of examples of that in a minute or so. What is meant by market deregulation? Well, what that means is we're trying, through government intervention, to open up a market to greater competition, to make it more contestable, in particular by reducing one or more barriers to entry. You see, there could be several barriers to firms coming into the market, from patent laws to the need to have licenses and what have you. If you deregulate a market, the aim is to increase the number of competing suppliers, stimulate competition, innovation, and hopefully drive prices down for consumers. And finally, what is meant by contracting out and competitive tendering? This is a key one, and we're going to have a lesson, a revision session on this one as well. Well, competitive tendering or contracting out is when you put a project out to tender so that firms in the private sector can bid for the right to provide the service. So hospitals might put their laundry services or their catering services out for tender, or the IT services. A group of schools might put a school meal service out to tender. Or, for example, a business might bid for the right to build and then maintain a new public road or a bypass, or perhaps a new bridge, for example. So competitive tendering is controversial. There's a lot of good economics in that, but it's when the public sector essentially invites the private sector to bid to produce or provide the service. And there's a lot of controversy in many ways, as we'll see in our separate video. Just to round off this little video as an introduction, here's a little quiz for you to have a go at. I've done a bit of research here and I've listed 12 businesses and sectors. And here's the challenge for you. Can you identify whether, as of January 2021, they are in the state sector, in other words, the public sector, or are they in the private sector of the economy? Now, here's a chance for you to have a go at this. So maybe either take a screenshot and print it out, or put it into your notes, or just press that pause button once more time. Have a go, and when you're ready, press play, and we'll go through the answers together. State or private sector? Okay, if you're ready to go through the answers, let's go through them. I tried this with my class, by the way, and the top score we got was 7 out of 12. So anybody who beats 7 is doing tremendously well. The Royal Mail is in the private sector. In fact, we mentioned this, I think, in our bit earlier in the video. They were privatised, sold to private investors in 2013. By 2016, a fully fledged private sector business, competing with the likes of FedEx, UPS, DHL, and others. London Northeastern Railway, or LNER, is in the state sector. It's actually a train operating company, much loved. By the way, I travel on the line frequently from London to York and Leeds. London North East Railway was state owned. They took over the line from National Express, a private train operating company that decided they couldn't honour the contract. So that's part of the UK rail network, which is state owned. Ordnance Survey is in the private sector. It was privatised a few years back. The mapping company. The Behavioural Insights team is now a private sector business. This was set up by former Prime Minister David Cameron, otherwise known as the Nudge Unit, and they were trying to bring behavioural policy into government. They're quite successful, certainly very high profile at the time. They've now been basically outsourced and they've turned themselves into a sort of quasi private sector business, earning contracts from other firms who want to implement behavioural theory to improve their performance. How are we doing? Now number 5, Northern Rock. Some people might remember the Northern Rock. It is now private. In many ways it doesn't exist. The Northern Rock was privatised and sold to Virgin Money. It used to be a private sector bank. It fell foul of the global financial crisis and was nationalised, and they've now been sold to Virgin Money, including they bought the outlets, and there's a big way of breaking into the banking system. Network Rail is in the state sector. It's a not-for-dividend company. They make money, but they operate the train network in the UK, the stations, the lines, the timetables, the safety systems, and the Network Rail is state-owned. Scottish Water is state-owned. Not every water utility, regional water businesses are state-owned. Most are private, but Scottish Water is in fact state-owned. Tote Betting. Tote Betting is a private company, but it used to be in the state sector. Well, it was a nationalised betting company. They used to appear in every racecourse that was sold to Betfred a few years ago. Scottish Power is a regional electricity and gas company, and it's in the private sector. That one was privatised. National Express Coaches is private. Again, a business that used to be state-owned. The government used to run National Express Coaches. It's now a privatised business. The London Underground, or TfL, Transport for London, is state-owned. Operated, funded by the government, emergency loans during the pandemic. And British Nuclear Fuel, BNF, was one of the first major businesses to be privatised several years ago. Did you get close to 7 out of 12? If you did, your knowledge is unbelievably good. But the point I want to make is that there's quite a mix of public and private sector businesses in the UK. It's true to say that most people work in the private sector. So in 2020, if we think about employment, 5.5 million people were public sector workers, just under 20% of employment. And about a third work for the NHS, clearly a public sector organisation. Just over a quarter work in education, including state schools and colleges and universities. And 19% worked in public administration, in other words, local and national civil service. So there we go. We've introduced the difference between the private and the public sector. What we will then do in the future videos in this little series, this playlist, is think about some of the economic issues surrounding state ownership versus privatisation, contracting out, and other topical issues. It's an important part of economics available on IB, and hopefully you'll join me for the future videos.